Alrighty, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you might be joining us from here in the world. A very warm welcome here from London. My name is Jens Henschel, and I'm going to be your coach and presenter for this webinar. And we have such an exciting topic here for you today, demystifying your customer's buying journey. We really want to look under the hood. What is your customer doing? What process are they going through on a regular drumbeat to translate an external business need, a risk or opportunity, into demand for your product or service? Such an important topic for you to become a successful sales manager and to build a successful relationship with your customer. Alrighty, okay, so what have we prepared for you today? Let me just walk you through real quick our little agenda here. First of all, I would like to share with you, what this buying journey is actually looking like. I want to provide you with a map pretty much that you can use to think of when you are interacting with your customer next time around to see, okay, where are they at in that buying journey process and what do I need to be doing as sales manager to interact with them in the most appropriate way. We want to look into who are those stakeholders that live along that buying journey process and how do you influence them in the best way possible. And then lastly, most importantly, I would say even, we want to give you some tips and tricks where and how you can engage with your customer along their buying journey process in the best way possible. If you've been, to our webinars on a regular basis, you know obviously how it goes. I probably will be spending around about 30 minutes, 40 minutes presenting to you that theory and the content that we have prepared, and then we'll dive into some of the questions that you might be having. And I'm pleased to say that I have, again, my colleague Ivan Stevanovic there in the background here with us today, who will lead that Q&A process. You want to say quickly hello as well, Ivan?
Yeah, yes, thanks. So, hi, everyone. Looking forward to receiving your questions and comments. Do feel free to use both Q&A and chat, whichever feels easier and more comfortable. Just get those questions running. I'm sure that Jens can answer any question you ask.
Oh yeah, you set the bar there quite high there, Ivan. Yeah, but thank you. So again,
get the purpose.
Yes, exactly, right. So guys, don't hesitate to already put your questions in early while I'm giving the presentation towards the end. Ivan will be coming back in with us and sort out those questions. We'll be having a little conversation between the two of us, considering all those questions that you have submitted. Alrighty, okay. So let me get going here on my side. And before we kick it off, I would like you to just get familiar with who we are. Again, some of you might be joining us on a regular basis. Some of you might be coming and joining us for the very first time. So who are we as FIVIS? We are a training and consultancy company. We're based here in London. And, I was looking for one sentence, one phrase, one statement that really galvanize what we're standing for. And all of the trainers and coaches, me included, that work here at FIVIS, we're all ex-procurement professionals. We've been spending all of our professional careers on your customer side, buying what you're selling, right? We've been, busy buying and procuring, all sorts of goods and services over our careers. And we fundamentally believe that makes us the perfect sales trainers to you. We try to activate the voice of your customer in our training environments, and we want to do exactly the same in this webinar here today. When we founded this company in 2018, our mission was really to turn traditional sales training on its head, right? Where you're just being, taught on just yet another sales methodology. We wanted to do this differently and to train you from your unique customer's point of view. And what we do normally is that we outline to you first, how does your customer actually buy? And then ultimately, tell you on how they want to be sold to. And that's exactly one of those topics that we're going to be covering here in today's session. We're going to be explaining and outlining to you, how does your customer actually go through that procurement process, that buying process? What role does the buyer play there in particular? And how can you manage that buying journey process on your customer side in a way that they buy what you have to sell? Alrighty, with that being said, let's go straight into it and let's start demystifying your customer's buying journey. Such an essential step to be a successful supplier and sales manager. First of all, before we go into the nitty-gritty detail, of what the process actually looks like, we need to start off with a question that all of you should be asking yourselves on a regular basis when you interact with your customer. And that is that question that you see here on your screen, namely, why does my customer want to buy from us? Why do they actually want to buy what we have to sell, right? Nobody on your customer side just randomly picks up the phone or sends you an email to say, hey, we want your product. There is always a reason behind it. And if we want to be successful sales managers and suppliers, we have to have a good answer to that question, because obviously in the interaction with our customers, we want to make sure that we reiterate and reassure them that we actually know why, what we have to offer is meeting their respective business needs. So to rephrase this question, we could also say that we are after, we're trying to identify what drives really demand for our product or service on our customer side. And there's various elements to that I would like to, explore with you in the next few minutes or so. So we distinguish between two particular demand drivers that create demand for the product or service that you're offering. The first category of demand drivers is the so-called external demand drivers. So what do we mean by that? Your customer obviously, lives in a certain business environment, and that business environment can serve as a trigger point for them to look into what you have to offer. So more, explicitly, your customers are continuously investigating their business environment to see what are potential business risks to their existing business and what are potential business opportunities for them that they should be considering, should be leveraging to become even more successful as an organization. And that will trigger, ultimately, demand for your product. And this is very important to keep in mind. Demand for your product or service is not falling out of the blue or out of the sky. There's always a reason behind it. And us as sales manager, knowing what lies behind that demand, anticipating what the risks and opportunities are, helps us to better interact with the customers that we're managing. So those are external demand drivers. Now, there's another level to that, or another dimension to this, which we call internal demand drivers. So even if you know your customer's business needs very well, even if you know what risk and opportunities they face as a business, that does not necessarily mean that if you have that perfect product that they will ultimately buy from you, that they create that demand signal on your side. And that could be because of various different reasons, which we cluster under internal demand drivers. So let me give you a few examples of what I mean by internal demand drivers. Your demand for your product or service can be influenced, for instance, by the various stakeholders that make part of your customer's organization. There's many different stakeholders, many different functions, many different personalities that might have a certain view if what you have to offer is actually of importance or not. So even if you perfectly match this external demand driver, if you perfectly match the risk or opportunity that your customer is experiencing with the product and the solution that you're offering, there could be still some internal demand drivers, for instance, some stakeholders that are preventing you from making the sale, right? So these internal demand drivers can heavily influence what you sell, when you sell, how much you sell, or if you make the sale at all with your customer. Another internal demand driver are obviously, your customers' KPIs, those stakeholder KPIs that they need to be pursuing, right? If their KPI is not necessarily aligned with that external demand driver, then you might be struggling actually to make the sale, despite the fact that you're perfectly addressing that business need or business requirement that exists out there in the world for your customer. Linked to that are obviously personal motivators. Also, the relationship history plays a big role, right? You might be a new sales professional coming into the game, managing that relationship with your customer. You think that you've identified their external demand driver, their business need. You have the perfect solution for them. But the history between the two companies could maybe prevent you from realizing that sale that you're after. People play obviously a big role. Business is still between people. And, if you're not getting along, or if they're not getting along with you on an individual and personal level, this might be also preventing you from making that sale that you are anticipating. And lastly, and something that we want to focus on, is the process. Your customer goes through a certain process on a regular drumbeat to translate that external demand driver, that risk or opportunity, into demand for your product or service. And we want to look into this process more in detail so that you can understand it, that you can manage it, that you can help your customer navigate that process so that they effectively buy what you have to offer. So this process we call the buying journey, the customer's buying journey. You might have heard of that concept, and I want to, very much in detail explain to you that process, that buying journey process that your customer is going through, so that you understand what is actually happening on your customer side. We want to really lift the curtain to make you aware on what steps your customer is going through. So, your customer's buying journey, when they embark onto the buying journey, it always starts with this first step. And the step is problem or opportunity identification, right? So your customer first needs to be aware that there is something that they need to be doing about a problem or about an opportunity. They need to be pretty much become aware of a business risk or a business opportunity that they need to be tackling. That is the trigger point for them to embark onto a buying journey. So your customer is not always, maintaining or running a buying journey. They need to have a trigger point to actually initiate that process in the first place. After they've realized that they have a problem or an opportunity that they want to tackle, they go into solution exploration mode, right? So let's maybe take an example here. Let's say your customer has realized that they should be coming up with a new product because end consumer needs have changed and they want to cater to these end consumer needs in the best way possible. They have identified that opportunity and now they go into solution exploration mode to say, well, how can we address it? What kind of new product should we actually developing, creating to be able to cater to that business opportunity that we have identified? So they're forming teams, resources, internal discussions take place to elaborate and determine how can we best as customer organization address that external opportunity or that problem that we've identified. The next step in that process is that your customer will become very specific on what their real business needs are, right? Because there might be, some elements that they can do themselves internally and some elements maybe they need external support. So they want to make sure that they clearly define what they require as an organization, which capabilities and capacities, which ingredients or services they require to make sure that they can fulfill solution that they have identified. Your customer might get even more granular than this and subdivide the business needs into specific, specifications based for the various components that they require to fulfill the business need. Based on that, they might determine that some of those business needs cannot be addressed internally. We need external support. And they look out for suppliers, companies such as yourself, to help them address those business needs, to cater to the solution and effectively address the problem or opportunity that they've seen in the market. A purchasing decision is eventually being made, hopefully selecting you as their supplier. A contract is put in place with the supplying organization, and then the contract is being executed. So this is the regular drumbeat that your customer is going through, the process that they apply, the buying journey process that they apply to translate an external signal about an opportunity or risk and how they translate that into demand for your product or service. And these are the steps that, again, your customer is going through on a regular basis. Now, I know that probably we have a lot of seasoned sales professionals here in our webinar today, and you probably will immediately spot where the flaw is in this, right? Well, while it's true that your customer goes through this process step by step, they don't go through this process in this linear fashion at all. There's a lot of reiterative steps that they take, and this has, many different reasons. People change jobs, there's different priorities, the external environment might change, people might be leaving the company, etc., and that makes them, go through process over and over again. And you might have experienced that as, seller and supplier yourself, where you feel that your customers are very close to signing the contract, and then all of a sudden, 6 months, there's nothing that you hear from your customer again, and probably they've gone back to previous steps to reconsider, reevaluate if what the previous decision that they've made, if they're still valid or not. And this is hyper frustrating for you as suppliers and sales managers, of course. And I think this is nothing new, right? This frustration you probably have experienced throughout your careers. Now, what might be new is that this inefficiency, this procrastination, as I call it, is also super frustrating for your customer and for their organization and for their leadership teams. Because imagine that. If your customers' leadership teams have clearly identified a problem or an opportunity that they want their organization to tackle, but if there's continuous, procrastination around, should we now buy, should we now bring in that supplier, yes or no, is this actually a business need, is the specification right or not? Well, then this business opportunity that might have been worth today 1 million might be only worth 20,000 in 6 months from now. So speed and time plays an important role, and this drives your, customers' leadership teams, crazy that their organization have identified a problem, have identified an opportunity, but then they're not progressing fast enough along their buying journey. But here lies the opportunity for you, the sales opportunity where you can step in and support and help your customer in that issue that I've just outlined to you. You can help your customer navigate the twists and turns of their buying journey. You can help them navigate along that buying journey. You can be that enabler and facilitator for them to, make sense of what's happening along that buying journey, to bring stakeholders together and effectively make them progress into the direction that you want them to progress to, namely to buy your product or service. So in the following sections, we want to explore with you what challenges your customers facing along that buying journey and what interventions you can take, what actions you can take to help them progress along that buying journey. And that really differentiates you from competition. You're probably, part of companies that produce amazing products, amazing services. But how do you really differentiate yourself from competition that produces similarly good products? Well, it is by doing this, by taking into account the internal demand drivers, and especially the process that your customer is going through and the help that you can offer to navigate and help them progress along that process in the most efficient way. So let's look into this more in detail now. And we'll go back now to that buying journey process that I just explained to you, but we will subdivide it into 4 different phases, because that will allow us to more, holistically look into what we need to be doing without getting lost into the nitty-gritty details. So let me show you the 4 phases on how we have subdivided your customer's buying journey. Phase number 1, fairly easy, is just this realization stage, right? Your customer needs to realize that they need to take action, realize that they have an opportunity, they need to realize that there is a business need that they should be addressing. The second phase that your customer is going through is the evaluation phase, just evaluating what kind of options that they have available internally or externally to address that problem or opportunity that I have identified. The next stage is more commercially led, right? It's a negotiation process. If your customer is, considering to bring in, external support, there is this commercial stage where they need to negotiate potentially with you to get you in and to determine what terms under which you should be supplying them. And then lastly, it's the execution phase, the phase where your customer is executing the contract that they have established with you. Now, if I would ask you now to reflect just for a moment, where do you normally interact with your customers? If you see now the different phases in the buying journey process, if you are, honest to yourself, where would you say you would normally reach out to your customer at what stage or what phase? Or where would your customers normally reach out to you? And if you just think about it, it's probably that phase number 3 that you most likely interact with your customer. And this has several reasons. We normally are very much conditioned as sales professionals to only think, well, the interaction with my customer is all about, getting that deal sealed, right? To negotiate, to get commercial terms in place, to sell something. And we always are very much conditioned to immediately jump onto that negotiation train. But as you can see, this is just a small sliver, only 1 phase out of 4 that your customer is going through along their buying journey. And there's a lot of lost opportunities if you're not paying attention to, the previous steps that your customer has gone through, if you're not trying to reach out to them proactively to be part of that buying journey from the very beginning. So you spend a little time on that, while you probably should be spending more time on the initial 2 phases, right? Because 80% of, the decision of to buy or not to buy or what to buy, quite frankly, is made in phase number 1 and phase number 2. So as sales managers, we have an interest to understand that, to engage with our customers early before we go into this negotiation phase where in the end of the day, it's only about price. Lastly, you also want to pay attention that you're not just dropping the ball when the contract has been signed or the agreement is in place with your customer. You want to make sure that you continuously support them along their buying journey during the execution phase. And as you know, I'm obviously a procurement professional myself. I can tell you that most of my KPIs, when I was still a buyer on your customer side, most of my KPIs were addressed in phase number 4. So if you then not show up and help me or support me to reach my KPIs, well, guess what? I'm probably not going to consider you next time around when the contract is up for negotiation or we try to do something differently as a business. So this is the buying journey process. And I would like to use now, in the remainder of the time that we have, a very easy example to walk you along that buying journey process, to explore with you what the challenges are that your customers being faced with along this buying journey, and to discuss with you for each phase what interventions you could take to address your customers' challenges and to be seen as that navigator, that supporter, facilitator of their own internal buying journey. And as you know, in my webinars, I always try to use examples that are so easy that everybody can relate to. Apologies if that example is not completely fitting your business environment, but just play along here and immerse yourself into that example and maybe relate it back to what you are selling to your respective customers. So let's imagine a customer that produces this lovely product, a detergent that maybe we have all sitting around in our kitchens. So this is the product that they produce, the customer's producing, right? And you as a supplier, you might be supplying them with this, or your customer buys this in the market, namely a red chemical that they need to produce the detergent that you have just seen on your screen. So this is the setup. Your customer buys this product and they produce a washing up detergent. Now, the first question that we want to ask ourselves is, why would a customer embark on a buying journey, a new buying journey at all, right? Because the situation could be, again, your customer is very content with what they currently buy. They have a set of suppliers, and why should they change a running system, right? I mean, as I said, the buying journey starts with problem identification, opportunity, assessment. If your customer is not really, seeing any reason to change what they currently do, why would they? I, as the buyer, I might not be really, super happy if I have to entertain a buying journey, because I know how complex it can be, how many stakeholders live along that buying journey, how many people I need to align on certain things. So I might be actually quite content not, entertaining a buying journey. So we want to discuss this a little, this phase number 1, because obviously you might have an interest as supplier to trigger a buying journey on your customer side, right? If you're not yet a customer, if you're not yet a supplier, you obviously want to make sure that your customer is incentivized to go into this buying journey, to consider maybe what you have to offer. Or if you're already an incumbent supplier, you might want to convince your customer to do something differently. So you want to reopen that previously shelved buying journey that they've entertained. So let's assume for the moment your customer is, again, outside of a buying journey process, and your intention is to put them and incentivize them to start and embark onto a buying journey process. And the question that we should be asking ourselves as supplier and sales manager is the following. Well, what are the triggers? What are the initiators for a customer to start a buying journey? And let's take this back to the example that we've just discussed. I might be buying, this red chemical. I've been buying it for years. I've been buying it from the same suppliers. Happy days, not an issue. So why would I all of a sudden start a new buying journey? What are my triggers and initiators? And I want you just to think for a moment or so what these triggers could be. Just think for yourself, what could it be that triggers your customer to start and embark onto a new buying journey with you? Or in general, not just with you, but in general. So what is one trigger? There's a very common trigger in many organizations. I would say at 99% of your customers' organization is, well, they have a strategy setting process. Normally 6 months, 8 months prior to their fiscal year end, your customers' organization will be sitting together in focus groups to discuss, do we need to be doing something differently? our strategy still up to scratch? Has anything changed in the market that makes us believe that we need to be changing the game here? Do we need to change anything with regards to this red chemical? Or are we still okay? Do we need to be changing something with regards to that detergent that we're producing? Or are we still okay? So there's a strategy revision process that goes on that obviously your customer entertains. And we as supplier, we obviously want to be acutely aware on when our customers are doing this. Because if we are catching them at that instance, in that moment in time, obviously they're super open to have our input as well to consider maybe different options, right? And here we obviously want to be very much aware on what the external demand drivers are, their risk and opportunities, to consult them on what they actually should be doing. If we do this when the fiscal year ends and when they just think about negotiation, then it's too late, right? There's no longer an interest to have this blue sky thinking or to investigate things that should be done differently. So this is one trigger point, one initiator why your customer might be deciding to jump onto a buying journey. The second element is, well, external impulses. There might be some regulatory change, there might be some political change, a tariff coming into place, a competitor moving into a market, new technology, AI, the name of the game at the moment. Things like that might be changing and shifting things so dramatically for your customer that they feel compelled to do things differently, maybe with regards to that red chemical that we've just talked about. So what we want to investigate now is, now that we've understood, what are the trigger and initiators for our customers to jump onto that buying journey, we want to understand what are their challenges that our customers face there at this particular stage of that buying journey, this realization phase. Why is that so important? Because if we are very specific and if we have a good understanding of their specific challenges, then we can determine an action plan, an intervention plan on what we can do proactively to get in touch with our customer, to be seen as a consultant, helping them, enabling them, making them understand what risk and opportunities are. This is not the point or not the place to send them over a price list with what you have to offer. This is where you involve and engage with them on a consultative basis to be perceived as a partner that they want to take along that journey of their buying journey. So let's go through some challenges here, and I've drafted a few common challenges that we have collected over the years that are predominant at this particular stage of your customer's buying journey. So first of all, there might be the lack of knowledge, and this is something that surprises a lot of suppliers oftentimes. Don't assume that your customer has complete knowledge about their market, about their business environment. Absolutely not. They're always open to learn more and to be hinted on certain things that they might not be aware of. They might not be aware of a certain risk with regards to that red chemical that maybe you might be aware of because you're playing more in this chemical market as a supplier, right? So submitting them or addressing that lack of knowledge is obviously considered as support and as of help by your supplier. There could be also information overload, the complete opposite, that your customer has a lot of insights and information, but they don't know how to prioritize to see really what is the most important risk and opportunity that they should be focusing on. There could be conflicting data. It could be that they struggle to prioritize what really they should be focusing on as an organization. And this is another common, misperception that many suppliers have. They see their customers as this perfect organization that are super strategically aligned and they know exactly what they should be doing. But this is not the case, ladies and gentlemen, right? Your customers also struggle to prioritize and they are looking for support and help to be consultant to a certain degree, on what they actually should be doing. They struggle to take action. And there's also personal biases, right? There might be some leadership teams within your customer's organization that always go into a certain direction, that always address only that opportunity or this risk without really noticing that actually something else is happening in the market. And that independent voice that could be you is obviously seen as help and support, especially at that early stage of the buying journey process. So let's look into what your help could be. So here are some suggestions on what you can do to engage with your customer that early on in their buying journey process. Well, make sense of their business challenges, right? And it goes back to, the external demand drivers that we discussed at the outset of this session here today, namely to understand what are the risks and opportunities, what are their business needs, and help them understand what they as a company should actually be focusing on. Give them a vision on what they should be rather doing, instead of what they're currently doing. Consult them on their issues. Think big picture and avoid commercial details. And I alluded to this early on, right? I mean, this is the moment for you to really think out of the box and get them excited and engaged about new ideas, new approaches. When they revise their strategies, they're receptive to these kind of things. Provide workshops, showcases, data and facts, and maybe share end consumer diagnostics, right? Show them that you not only understand your reality very well, but you also understand your customer's reality and the end consumer's reality, and connect the dots and make them aware on what you can contribute to make them successful in their respective markets. This is really what is considered of help that early on in your customer's buying journey. Let's go to phase number 2. So let's assume for the moment your customer has, gone through phase number 1, right? With or without you, we don't really know, and they sailed on into phase number 2, right? And that's where they're currently at. And you might be reaching out to them in phase number 2. They might be reaching out to you in phase number 2. And obviously, we want to amend and adjust on how we communicate with them. We cannot just have the same narrative, the same pitch in each phase. We need to make sure that we adjust and amend it depending upon where our customer's at in their buying journey process. So let's assume for the moment they're now moved into phase number 2. And one step that is very much of interest to you is, or should be of interest to you, is how they go about, exploring solutions. What do they do to assess what actions they should be taking? What solution is appropriate to the problem or opportunity they have identified? So let me outline to you what's happening behind the screen, behind the curtain on your customer side. Your customers normally think in initiatives and in projects because that's how they staff and allocate resources, right? The first initiative or project they might launch based on their solution exploration phase is, well, we run a commercial intervention, right? This is one option that they have as a business to say, we have a certain problem. One solution to that problem could be that we just do something, alongside the commercial elements of it. We want to drive efficiencies. We want to improve margin, whatever it might be. We just, touch the commercial elements of it and nothing else. We keep the red chemical as it is, and we just try to get better commercial conditions around it. So this might be one initiative that your customers might be considering as part of a solution. Secondly, your customer might be saying, well, maybe let's adapt the product, and maybe exchange the red chemical with the blue chemical. So we're not completely reinventing the wheel. We're just twisting and tweaking it a little bit because that probably will better address the problem that we want to cure for. Next one is, well, they could completely, reinvent the wheel here, and namely to come up with a new product to say, look, we need to forget about our red detergent. It's no longer profitable. It's no longer, selling enough. Consumers no longer love it. We need to be doing something new. Let's come up with a completely new product that we're going to be launching here. So these are the 3 categories that your customer's thinking in. And again, I want you to mentally put this back into what you have to offer in your customer's reality. This is just an example for you to get the gist of what is actually happening on your customer side, right? So commercial intervention, what are the characteristics of that? From your customer's point of view, this is normally an initiative that they launch with relatively low risk, right? Few stakeholders are involved on their side to make this solution become a reality. It's normally addressing a relatively simple business need, short timelines, so the projects are being delivered relatively swiftly. The specifications are not changed. And I should also say that probably 80% of what your customers entertain as project, as solutions to problems that they've identified, are probably commercially driven. And the reason behind that is that technical resources that are required for the other project categories are very scarce, right, and very precious. So most of their interventions, when they're on a buying journey, are more commercially focused. And we want to be aware of that as supplier and sales managers. So what are the characteristics of an existing product adaptation? As you might have guessed, it's more risk involved for these, right? More stakeholders are involved. It's more medium term. It's complexer. Probably the specifications are being adjusted and amended. Technical resources are needed. Some testing will be required, right? Imagine if you change a component of a washing up detergent, you want to make sure that it's safe, that the end consumer is not getting harmed by the product, that it's still sustainable or environmentally friendly, etc. So all sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration that your customer needs to fulfill under this particular project. And lastly, the new product initiative, obviously the highest complexity of all of them. Many stakeholders are involved, complex, longer timelines, very expensive. Probably financial resources are also needed to promote the product and the new initiative. More marketing budget is required. So it's much more complex than the previous two. So now we have a good understanding of how your customer goes about determining or evaluating different solutions and what categories they think and what challenges they might be facing when they explore, compare different solutions that they have at their fingertips. Just from my personal experience, what I always felt slightly frustrated about when suppliers came into my meeting was the following: that they could not see that we were only running a commercial intervention project, but continuously talking me into, well, Jens, why don't you consider a different specification, a different product of us, a different software, a different whatever they had to sell? Well, they didn't realize that we didn't have the resources to do so. And they completely, sidelined that if I wanted to do things differently, I would needed to go back to my internal stakeholders, to my managers, that had already made the decision that we only wanted to run a commercial intervention and not an existing product adaptation. And this is exactly what I want you to realize here. We want to make sure that we provide our customers with the input that they require to go back and internally convince and persuade and maybe challenge previously made decisions. So the first thing that you really need to decide when you realize that your customer is in phase number 2, in the evaluation phase, you want to understand, obviously, is it a commercial intervention, an existing product adaptation, or a new product initiative? And then for yourself, you want to make the conscious decision, do I want to move them north? So do I want our stakeholders challenge internally made decisions to maybe go back to the problem identification stage? Or am I fairly content on where my customer is and where they headed towards? And do I want them or facilitate or help them to progress faster along that buying journey to go and make a decision with regards to what supplier to select? This is a decision that you need to be taking. But the initial understanding really needs to take place for you to know, well, what internal initiative is your customer actually pursuing? Is it more of a commercial intervention, an existing product adaptation, or a new product initiative? Let's again give you some tips and tricks on what common challenges are in that phase number 2, right? And there's plenty of challenges. This is actually, phase number 2 is one of those phases where there's a lot going on in your customer side, and you can show and support a lot and be that supplier that really helps them progress along their buying journey process. First of all, the challenge that they're being faced with is alignment and decision-making. They might not be 100% aware on what actually the alignment decision-making process is. And again, this might be a surprise because we always see our customers as that perfect organization. They might not be even knowing what stakeholders they need to involve to maybe challenge a previously made decision. Because they are so much into their day-to-day, they only see their own little world, that they might not be able to really anticipate that, well, they might be need to contacting somebody from a different region or a different production site or from the headquarters organization to progress along that buying journey process. And that is linked, obviously, that there's many stakeholders potentially involved, especially in these more complex initiatives that we just discussed. There might be conflicting needs. There might be communication or lack thereof that is not managed well. There's obviously going to be an internal conversation in your customer around opportunity costs. There's a lot of different opportunities that they might be considering or dismissing. And, people might be making the argument, well, we shouldn't be doing this or that because of opportunity losses. Personal motivators play a big role here. Resource constraints is always an issue. Competing priorities, etc., etc. So there's many things that go on that could distract your customer from progressing along, from procrastinating in this evaluation stage. Now let's flip the script and see what we can offer them, what we can offer as support to help our customer, become more determined on what they should be doing. Something that sounds super simple, but I feel many suppliers are not doing. Well, you need to provide your customer with a clear ROI, return on investment, why they should be going with you, why they should be adapting a product, why they should come up with a new product instead of continuing buying the red chemical, as I alluded to earlier on, right? A clear statement, a return on investment and a what-if analysis in a way that I can easily take back to my other stakeholders. So imagine you interacting with me, I'm in procurement, and you tell me, Jens, you shouldn't be using the red chemical, take another specification of ours, the blue chemical is much better than the red one. This is normally where the conversation ends. And you give me maybe a price differential, and then you expect me to do the ROI and to do the what-if and to go back to my stakeholders to convince them that the blue chemical is actually better than the red chemical. And what is it that I'm really bad at as a procurement professional on your customer side? Well, what I'm bad at is I'm bad at selling, convincing, persuasion. But you guys are good at it, right? You are trained on that. You do this day in, day out. So here's a specific help by providing our internal stakeholders on the customer side with the ammunition that they need to present and feedback to their stakeholders on what actually should be done and should be happening. Project manage, very, very important. Most of initiatives are being killed off or not being continued because there's nobody really keeping, track on it and what's happening, what are the next steps, taking meeting minutes, all the, this nitty-gritty administrative stuff that nobody loves doing. You can step in. You can step in and be that project facilitator that helps your customer along that buying journey process. Address their business assurance angst. This is something, very, very important. Whenever something new happens in my organization, whenever we change a product, whenever we look into a new software, whenever we do something different to what we've done before, we have certain anxieties. Anxieties that something go wrong, anxieties that we fail, anxieties that we're going to be penalized individually for having introduced a new solution. Well, you want to address this head on. Why don't you put something on the table to your customer and say, we understand your anxieties, those anxieties are real, and this is what we're doing to prevent these anxieties to become a reality. Offer specific technical support, right? We alluded to early on, I might be needing technical resources to, test products, etc. I might not have these resources. I would love to do it, but I just don't have them. But maybe you can help me with that. Provide a clear message track for your solution to their challenge. And again, in a way that I can use it internally. Give me that sales pitch that I can be using and can be taking back to my manager to convince them that we maybe need to reopen previously made decisions. Offer clear reasons for the why. Create and keep up a sense of urgency. Also important, right? You want to make sure that you always remind your customer on why we're doing this project and initiative here in the first place and why it's important to move on quickly because the opportunity that might have been great today might be minuscule in 6 months' time from now. So you want to keep that pace, that urgency. And your customer is really appreciating if they have support of someone externally supporting them in doing so. Okay, so we obviously have a great handle now on phase number 2. We know what's going on in phase number 2, and there's out of completion. We cannot go so much into detail, obviously, in the next 2 phases. But just to remind you, obviously, phase number 3 is all about the negotiation. This is the point where you receive the tender document. This is the point where you start to negotiate with your counterparts, where you start and talk about terms and conditions. And then the execution phase is obviously when the contract and the supply agreement is put into effect. I just want to, quickly turn your attention to these 3, charts that I just shown you on the screen, because obviously, depending upon where your customer is, your ability to turn the conversation from price to value is being challenged. Your ability to talk about demand is different depending upon where your customer's at in their buying journey process. So price, the focus on price is obviously the biggest when it comes to phase when your customers in phase 3 starting to embark into phase 4, right? They are primed to only talk price. If you then start there to invite them into a workshop or to say, well, have you considered this? Or let me invite you to our innovation center to see what we currently are doing. Your customer doesn't have time for that. They consider you as completely not understanding their buying process. They see you as a not customer-centric supplier there. And the only thing that they want to talk about then is price in the end of the day. So don't underestimate that, because this is normally, where you get in touch with your customer. You're always surprised as a supplier. Why is my customer not talking about value? Well, guess what? Because you are approaching them very late in their buying journey process. On the flip side, if you are there at the beginning, at the outset, that's where you can influence demand. You can influence demand to your advantage and maybe steer them into the direction that makes them consider your specification from the very beginning. Obviously, value is also very much a topic towards the beginning and towards the end of your customer's buying journey. As I alluded to early on, from my experience in procurement, most of my KPIs are addressed at phase number 4, the execution phase. So the value that you create for me as an organization, especially for me as a buyer, is the greatest towards the end of this process. So as you can see here, at the beginning, we discussed where you normally interact with your customer. And I think you all agree that it's probably phase number 3. But there's so many opportunities for you to engage with your customer in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 4, where you can talk about demand, where you can create demand, where you can influence value, all these interesting topics that we as sales professionals continues to talk about. So we need to get out of this trap to always just see the relationship with our customer as a negotiation process and focus more on where value is really being created, namely early on in their buying journey and consistently after the contract is being put in place. So keep in mind, this is your sales opportunity. You have all amazing products or services, but there's always a other company or competitor of yours that can maybe supply your customer with similarly good services. The opportunity really is to be that enabler, that facilitator along that customer's buying journey process. That really sets you apart and makes you that supplier and provider of choice that your customer is looking for. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was of value and of help for you, and I would be more than happy to answer some of the questions that you might be having in the remainder time that we have. So let me turn it back on to Ivan, if we have received any questions in the meantime.
Yes, of course we did. This was a powerful session, and as always, we have questions. Let me start with the first one. I'm not sure if we will be able to answer all of them. So, which stage in the buying journey do you see the most procrastination, or perhaps rank the top 3?
Yeah, so solution exploration, or the transition from problem identification to solution exploration. This is where I see the most procrastination that happen within customer organizations. That they go back and forth. Is this really a problem? Is this really an opportunity? Is this opportunity big enough? Is this problem significant enough for us to consider? You have, a leadership team of 5 that have 20 different views on one singular, issue. And then obviously the solution element comes into play, where then people say, well, this is not really a solution to the problem, or this solution is only addressing half of the issue, half of the opportunity. And it's a continuous back and forth in a loop pretty much that is very difficult to get out of. And this is, since it's the biggest procrastination, this is also the biggest opportunity. And that's what I always say, this word that you heard from me multiple times here is being that commercial consultant, knowing what really matters to your business, to your customer's business, and educating them to a certain degree, right? I'm not saying here that you should be telling your customer on how to run their business. They know how to run their business. But what you should be there is a consultant, again, that shows them a different avenue, a different path, a different perspective on this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we all live in, right? So to answer the question, phase 1 and transition to phase 2, this is where most of the procrastination takes place normally.
Thanks, Jens. Here's next one. So what to recommend to engage with the customer early in their buying journey? This one kind of continues on the previous one.
Yeah, so what would I recommend to engage early? What would I do? I think I would first Everybody should be aware what your customer's fiscal year is, right? I always see so many suppliers just randomly sending out emails to their customers and maybe to a procurement guy and say, hey, let's have a meeting. Let's discuss. Let's do a brainstorming workshop of what we can do differently or what we can be doing better. And you read this email saying, what's going on here, supplier? I mean, have you absolutely no clue what's happening on our side, right? So you want to avoid this from happening because you're being perceived then as a non-customer-centric supplier. You're being perceived just as somebody that wants to sell. Right, and I don't want to get this feeling. I want somebody that supports me as a buyer or our buying approach so that we can become successful as a customer organization. So you need to know when your the fiscal year ends of your customer, then deduct 6 months. That's where you need to be reaching out with these emails to have a brainstorming session, a workshop, invite them to your innovation lab, show them the latest software innovation that you came up with. God knows what it is, right? But that's where they're most receptive. When they have this strategic revision, that is one point. Lastly, I would say always keep them aware of most recent developments in their market. Your customers will always appreciate information about their business risk and their business opportunities. Don't package it up into, hey, here's this risk and we have the solution, go and buy from us. This should just be continuous, information and data sharing with them so that they can see you as this provider of insights that they can use to then consider to embark onto a buying journey. Good question.
Thanks, Jens. Here's another one, if I may comment. This one kind of reminds me of salespeople really perceiving procurement professionals as the people from the dark side or the villains. So here's the question. What is procurement's real role in managing buying journey?
Yeah, you're obviously not referring to me as being from the dark side, Ivan, right? But yeah, no, you're right. I know most of you in the sales world probably see the buyer, the commercial buyer, the procurement guy, a little bit as an obstacle, as a nuisance, as somebody that you want to avoid. And the reality couldn't be further from the truth. In one of our next webinars, actually, we want to walk you through what is the buyer's role along this buying journey process, right? Because they do play a distinct role. And I just give you a few numbers here to put this into context. 90% of what your customers buy in the market, so 90% of what they spend in terms of money, has to go through a procurement process on their end, right? So if you take a company such as Unilever, they are maybe buying externally goods and services around about 40 billion, around about 38 billion of that needs to go through a procurement process. And you as a supplier might be exactly part of that. So if you want it or not, you have to be dealing with a buyer. And that buyer is actually an important stakeholder that lives along that buying journey process that we just discussed. One could even argue they play a similar role to what I suggest you to do, namely to be that enabler, facilitator that addresses challenges, that project manages and helps navigate the customer move along that buying journey. So you don't want to miss, it's actually a good question, you don't want to miss maybe our next webinar where we're going to go more into detail on how we can be that facilitator and work together in harmony with procurement to make sure that you are that supplier that should be considered for the respective problem or opportunity that your customers identified. But in a nutshell, don't dismiss procurement. Consider them as an important stakeholder. That is super important. Okay, I think then we're coming close to the hour already. Then I would say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here today. And I hope obviously to see you soon, either in one of our webinars, or if this was of interest, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Maybe we can provide you with some deeper dive here on how you can build winning relationships with your customer, and in particular with that procurement function. So I hope to see you soon. Have a good weekend. Thank you again for your time, and see you in our next webinar. Bye-bye.